the forgotten war that shook India's Muslims and dragged Britain into Russia's grip. In the grand sweep of 19th-century conflicts, one war raged thousands of miles from India's borders, but rattled the very soul of the subcontinent. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877-1878 is remembered today as a European conflict between Russia and the crumbling Ottoman Empire. But what most people don't know is how this war triggered mass unrest among Indian Muslims, fueled Britain's fear of Russian influence in India, and laid the foundation for a powerful new force: pan-Islamic political identity. This wasn't just a European war, it was the war that cracked the Indian Empire from within, long before anyone realized it. At the heart of it was the Ottoman Caliphate. Though far away in Istanbul, the Sultan was still regarded by millions of Muslims across the world as the spiritual leader of Islam. For Indian Muslims, whether in Bengal, the Deccan, or Punjab, he wasn't just a distant monarch, he was the Caliph, the Caliph, the guardian of Mecca and Medina. So when Russia invaded Ottoman territory in the Balkans and the Caucasus, claiming to defend Christians under Muslim rule, the reaction in India wasn't quiet concern, it was outrage. The war began in April 1877 after years of political maneuvering. Russia wanted to expand its territory into southeastern Europe, weaken Ottoman influence, and protect Eastern Orthodox Christians. The Ottomans, meanwhile, were trying to hold together a collapsing empire. As the Russian army pushed deep into Ottoman territory, capturing Kars, Plevna, and eventually threatening Istanbul, Muslims across India saw it as an attack on Islam itself. The newspapers buzzed with emotion. Urdu journals wrote poems praying for Ottoman victory. Sermons in mosques turned political. Crowds in Delhi and Lucknow openly wept for the Caliph. In Bombay, donations were collected for the Ottoman army. And all of it, every emotional ripple, reached the ears of the British Raj. The British found themselves in an awkward position. They had historically been allies of the Ottomans, but their real concern was Russia. And now they feared that Russia's war in Turkey could spill over into their own empire, not with guns, but with ideology. If Russia could defeat the Ottoman Empire, what would that do to the loyalty of their 50 million Muslim subjects in India? Could Russia inspire a religious uprising? Could they fund an Islamic revolt through Persia or Afghanistan? These weren't abstract fears, they were discussed in London, Calcutta, and Simla in hushed tones behind closed doors. To many Indian Muslims, the war wasn't political, it was spiritual. They began holding massive prayer sessions, declaring solidarity with the Ottoman cause. Volunteers even attempted to travel to fight for the Ottomans, though few ever reached the front. One such movement, centered in Hyderabad and Rohilkhand, became so large that British authorities began arresting preachers for anti-state rhetoric. Even elite Muslim families, many of whom had served the British loyally since the fall of the Mughal Empire, now found themselves torn. Loyalty to the Queen meant silence. Loyalty to Islam meant protest. And the British could feel the tension building like a thundercloud. In response, Britain deployed a clever mix of suppression and distraction. They censored Islamic newspapers that promoted the Ottoman cause. They banned speeches that mentioned the Caliph. They quietly encouraged pro-British Islamic scholars to reframe the conflict as a distant war that had nothing to do with Indian Muslims. But the real shift came not through censorship, but through paranoia. In 1878, barely a year after the Russo-Turkish War ended with Russia's victory, Britain launched the Second Anglo-Afghan War. Officially, it was to prevent Russian diplomats from gaining influence in Kabul. Unofficially, it was to secure the northwest frontier against what the British now called pan-Islamic agitation. The British weren't just afraid of Russian guns, they were afraid of Russian ideas. The war in Turkey had awakened something they could not control, a sense of Islamic unity that transcended borders, cultures, and colonial boundaries. The echoes of the Russo-Turkish War would linger in India for decades. In 1888, the pan-Islamic thinker Jamaluddin Afghani toured the region, meeting with scholars, clerics, and activists. His message was simple: Muslim unity was the only shield against Western imperialism. And India, with its massive Muslim population and simmering resentment, became fertile ground for these ideas. By the early 20th century, this would morph into the Khilafat Movement, a massive Indian uprising in the 1920s demanding the British defend the Ottoman Caliphate after World War I. That movement would unite Hindus and Muslims for a time, draw in leaders like Gandhi, and even help spark the final push for Indian independence. But it all began here, with a forgotten war in Eastern Europe, a war that on paper had nothing to do with India, and yet it changed everything. It showed that religious identity could penetrate colonial control. It exposed how fragile the British grip really was, and it revealed that Russia didn't need to march into India with troops. They only needed to light a fire in the hearts of its people. The British Raj would last for another 70 years, but the seeds of unrest had already been planted. Every Islamic uprising, every political demand, every moment of resistance carried the hidden legacy of 1877. Because, when the Caliph was attacked, India responded, and the British learned that power doesn't just come from armies, it comes from faith and fear and the invisible ties that bind distant empires together. If you want more untold stories that connect dots across continents, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. We bring you the wars that weren't supposed to matter but changed the world anyway. Stay tuned, because what's coming next will blow your historical mind.